The New York Knicks were most fearful of the Detroit Pistons when Ausar Thompson was on the floor. We'll break down why that is in today's episode, Locked On Pistons Podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Ku Khahil. I've been covering the Detroit Pistons for the last 4 years for the Locked On Network, been a credential media member over the last 3 years. I appreciate all of your guys' support, the everydayers who make this your first listen of every single day. I appreciate all of you guys. And today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. In today's episode, we're finishing off our conversation with Gavin Shall of Locked On Knicks. We're going part 2 of our crossover episode. Today we'll be finishing our conversation about the Knicks and their changes and how they're going to change their team after this playoff battle with the Pistons and their deep run, and also talk about why the Knicks were most fearful of the Detroit Pistons when Ausar Thompson was on the floor. We're going to have those discussions, break it all down. I hope you guys enjoy the second part of this episode. Let's get right into it. Cut the intro a little bit shorter here so you guys can get right into the content. I'll catch you guys later. Yeah, my next question would be, so with that being said, do you think a change of the starting lineup will happen? Because like you mentioned, we talked about this before the series started, and I think it played out during the series. The Pistons starting lineup was one of the best starting lineups in the playoffs this past year. It was, I believe, 4.7 points per, I forget what their net rating was, but it was pretty good. But the Knicks starting lineup from, I believe, January or something, all the way through the playoffs, at least.
Sorry to interrupt you. Because I have it up right here. They were plus 12.6 in the playoffs, the Pistons starters.
Yeah, so the Pistons starters won those minutes against the Knicks starters. And the Knicks, their starters, like you mentioned, it was a long sample size of that being like, okay, not sure if this is working. Actually, a long sample size of it just not working. Yeah. Do you think that they will change that lineup moving forward now with a new head coach, or do you think it's going to be another year of trying to see if it's going to work?
I wish I knew, man. I have no idea. I kind of think they will probably start double big just because that was such a big storyline. And if you're Mike Brown, maybe you're inclined to say, all right, here, I'm immediately making a change. Here you go, Knicks fans. Or you might be inclined to say, hey, it wasn't the players that were the issue, it was that Tom Thibodeau was not particularly creative, not particularly inclined to run a ton of organized offense. And Tom Thibodeau, like, the biggest issue with him was that he just had areas that he was very comfortable and that he wasn't really willing to pivot off them. And one of them was that he just liked to roll the ball out there. And this isn't to say that he never ran sets, but he wanted it to be, hey, Jalen, go cook. Hey, Julius, go cook. And Karl Anthony Towns is not Julius Randle, right? He doesn't have that ability to just put his head down, draw 3 defenders, or he can do that a little bit, but then he can't really zip that pass to the corner like a Cade Cunningham can. Like Julius Randle, despite his reputation, is actually quite good at. That's an area where Cat wasn't that good. And I think starting Mitchell Robinson would be an improvement, but also a misidentification of the problem. I am not very optimistic that they would start Deuce McBride. I just don't. I think there was a world where, again, a coach like Taylor Jenkins, or if the Knicks had gone really, like, I guess, outside of like the main circle of coaches and hired like a young assistant who's very offensively inclined. They did get someone from the G League that fits that bill, so maybe he'll have some input on this. I don't think someone like Mike Brown, and in that I just mean just kind of a traditionalist in some ways and someone who's been around the NBA for a long time, will recognize that Deuce McBride, despite how small the backcourt is, that could be a very powerful combination between him and Jalen Brunson. That Deuce, despite the fact that he's small, like, can survive defensively and does bring some playmaking to the floor, brings a lot of spacing, brings a sense of randomness and just freneticism that the Knicks really lack in their starting lineup as of now. I think maybe the most optimistic version of that is perhaps they start Gershon Yabusele as like a genuine stretch four. And that doesn't get you all the way there because he's not the spacer that someone like Deuce is, and he doesn't have the activity level. And I think defensively, that would be really creaky to start him and Brunson and Cat together. But that's almost more interesting to me than the two options that are on the table right now. Like, I don't know, from a Pistons perspective, like, what version of the Knicks would scare you the most?
So we talked about this in Locked On Pistons throughout the series. The most fearful I felt for the Pistons was when Mitchell Robinson came into the game. Mitchell Robinson dominated. So I I feel like the majority of the Pistons community was real fearful of Mitchell Robinson minutes. And then I don't even know if this actually played out in the numbers. The numbers might say I'm lying, so it might just be something visually that I thought. But like anytime Josh Hart was on the floor, I felt comfortable with like the Pistons like chances, just because they didn't guard him. Anytime the Josh Hart was on the floor, they put Tobias and Cat had Dern roam off of Josh Hart, and it was like, okay, well that's something you'll live with. So the numbers may not back that up. They might have won Josh Hart's minutes a ton, but visually watching the game, I know that's what the Pistons strategy was, and it felt like that strategy worked when it was Josh Hart and Cat on the floor. So I've said this I wrote an article earlier in the year about the Knicks saying they need to just go full offense. I agree with what you said earlier. If the Knicks want to make it to the finals, their pathway is not to be a top defensive team. I don't think they have that personnel. Now, I didn't think the Pistons had that personnel last year, and somehow they did it. Ausar Thompson was enough, and Stu was able to do it. But maybe there's something within the Knicks defensively that we're not seeing, and they can pull it out. But I think their pathway to making to the championship and trying to win a championship is we got one of the most skillful fives ever in Karl-Anthony Towns, one of the best shooting centers of all time. We have one of the best scorers in the NBA, playoff scorers in the NBA, and Jalen Brunson. We have wings around them that can also create if you need them to and score the basketball with some size and length. We just need to space the floor out, give them all as much space as possible, and it's going to be incredibly hard to stop them. That's how I view their pathway to winning. So we'll see if they do it, but that's what I think is their pathway.
Yeah,
from an outsider's point of view.
For sure. I think you nailed it. And I think it's so interesting because the most obvious answer there for the Knicks would be if they didn't feel like leaning into offense was good enough, then Karl-Anthony Towns just probably shouldn't be on this team, and they should find a way to trade him for like a really good wing if they can, and just start Mitchell Robinson, because I think him plus OG plus Mikal in a better role, and you sprinkle in enough deuce, like you can insulate Jalen Brunson. And if they had kept Tom Thibodeau, I would have been all aboard. I was not an advocate for that, to be clear, but I would have been all aboard. All right, you better trade Cat then, and you better just say, hey, Jalen, you're going to have a 40 usage in the playoffs, and we're running everything through you, and we're going to try to have an elite defense around you. But once you keep Cat, like the numbers showed that even though the eye test screamed that Cat was a major issue defensively, the numbers showed that Jalen Brunson was a much bigger problem defensively for the New York Knicks than Karl-Anthony Towns was. And part of that is that Cat is an elite rebounder. When the Knicks actually trusted him to switch, and they showed some of this against Detroit, though I think this was a mistake. They backed off it a little bit as the series went on. He held up pretty well against guys like Cade. He held up even better against Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, like did kind of okay against Tyrese Halliburton. And I do think Mike Brown will bring some schematic versatility to the table that makes it a little bit more tolerable to play Cat and Brunson together. And then this is not a great place to be in when you acknowledge those are your two best players. And I don't know how much they can get to in the playoffs, but they were generally very, very good when only one of those guys was on the floor, because Brunson was good enough to prop up the offense. And then when Cat was in, you could just insulate him with high-level defensive wings. And if you actually played through Cat as a five, which we only really got to see against the Pacers because they somewhat inexplicably used very traditional coverage and didn't do what you said and put a wing on Cat and a big on Josh Hart and had him roam. Like Cat was just dominant in that series. He was super efficient, close to his regular season 50, 40, 90 numbers in terms of shooting. So I'm interested to see how teams cover the Knicks, and I'm interested to see if they do start Mitchell Robinson, whether you can find ways to still optimize Cat, because even though Mitch was terrifying and a force of nature, it felt so often in those minutes like Cat was just such an afterthought. And Tom Thibodeau really didn't design any offense for him. And you're like, all right, why is he even out there? Like he's just a spacer right now. And that doesn't feel like you're fully optimizing his usage. But were there any other like Knicks specific stuff you had, or do you want to get into like some of the Knicks Pistons matchup specifics? Because I had some questions about how you see that going if these two teams meet in the playoffs again next year.
No, that was the last of my questions.
All right. I think the first thing was, and we touched on this a little bit already, so I don't know how deep you want to go on it, but how much do you think like OG Anunoby and to a lesser extent Mikal Bridges specifically presented problems for Cade as one-on-one defenders versus just that the Knicks were obviously very much selling out to stop him specifically? As we noted before, they were sending multiple bodies his way, and that Cade with like slightly better conditioning, slightly better pull-up shooting, slightly better decision-making, and more help around him. Like, is Cade like capable of solving those problems and putting together like a really high efficiency 28 plus point per game series, kind of similar to what Jalen Brunson did against the Pistons offensively against the Knicks?
Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever needing to touch a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks for you. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. Again, that's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com. Use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com to get 50% off your first year with Monarch Money. Yeah, I don't know if Cade's ever going to be a hyper efficient player. Like, I think he's probably going to be like somewhere around like a 57, 58 true shooting during the regular season. That's why I expect him to be. And then the playoffs, he'll probably drop to like around 55, 54. But everyone's efficiency drops in the playoffs. The ones who don't, those are like the all-time greats that everyone remembers. The ones that actually improve their efficiency in the playoffs. But most people see the efficiency drop in the playoffs. So I expect that to probably, I don't see Cade ever being like, I don't know, I guess Luka, where Luka's like, somehow getting better, whatever. It's not that Cade can't be better in the playoffs, but I don't know if it's going to be determined by his efficiency. I don't know if that's ever going to be like what you remember Cade for. That's just not what I think. OG Anunoby, I thought, caused the most issues. Mikal, I think Cade has a good matchup against. He likes going after Mikal. When he can get that switch on Mikal, he seemed to be really excited about going after that matchup. I think the numbers bear out that during the regular season, he did pretty well against Mikal. Now, OG was a much bigger problem. He was obviously, OG's incredibly strong, very long, a big body, very good defender. It's very hard to get separation from him. I thought honestly, I want to give a lot of credit to OG for this, because there were times where I thought the Pistons were running, after game one, I thought the Pistons did a much better job of running actions to get OG off of him and really create these mismatches. They started using shooters and screen and roll to put Jalen Brunson in the screen and roll, force him to show and get back, and really try to give Cade these advantages. And it worked to a degree, but also OG was really just working his bleep off. Like, he would get stuck on a screen, and I would think that Cade's about to get this open shot, and somehow he's just full going, not getting tired, just continuing to and just get a side contest and just make it even harder. So I think Cade can get better, but I think also OG, it was just, you got to give credit to the defender. I think OG was just nonstop going, nonstop energy, and was just bought in and just giving Cade the absolute most he could give him. I thought OG did a really good job of doing that. I think Cade has some counters he can go to. I think if he gets a little stronger, that will help. I think the conditioning was the main thing. I felt like his legs were gone at a lot of times, but OG, I thought, was an absolute tremendous defender, and I give him a ton of credit. I think he's one of the best playoff defenders you're going to want, especially on the wing, that you can have in the playoffs. I think Ausar is going to be right behind him, maybe even leapfrogs him at some point in his career, but OG was tremendous. I got nothing but love and credit for OG. Mikal, I've seen some numbers actually over the last few weeks that Mikal was not as good defensively this year for the Knicks. I wonder how you feel about that. But OG, I have nothing but great things for him. He was fantastic.
Yeah, Mikal had a bad season as a screen navigator. And again, part of that was playing with Cap, but I think B-Ball Index had him as the worst high-flying screen navigator in the NBA, and the Knicks acquired him to be elite at that. So that was a really big issue for the Knicks. I do think specifically in the Pistons series, he surprised me with how well at times he held up against Cade, because Cade cooked him in the regular season, right? That was, I think, always back to that third game from Cade was up where he had like 36, 7 and 7. And the Knicks tried to go back to OG on him, and it was too late, and Cade was just too hot. That was like a top 3 to 5 performance I think any single player had against the Knicks last year. I do think Mikal had a better showing against him in the playoffs, but at times he was just too good. And to your point, like we talk so much about these individual matchups, teams are so good at hunting the guy they want to hunt. And obviously Jalen Brunson in hedge and recover, that was an area he really struggled. I think it's almost cleaner for the Knicks. And I wonder if Mike Brown would lean into this, given that like the Knicks felt like they didn't have to do this against Detroit, and they absolutely just have a chance against the Celtics to survive. They kind of just had to leave Brunson on an island, and he held up okay. I personally think Cade is just crafty enough and just a better passer than Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are, that he could maybe take advantage of that in a way. And it might be why the Knicks ultimately weren't comfortable with doing that, because it was basically Brunson switches and then OG and Mikal like peep in and like try to get steals. But if you surround Cade with shooters, that's hard to do. You mentioned the other name I wanted to bring up. Ausar Thompson was such an X factor. Obviously, Jaylen got him at the end of game 6, but overall, like he had real moments, like winning that matchup one-on-one, giving the Knicks wings a lot of trouble, just athletically, like really good at times. I think it was mostly during, but maybe at times he was also playing out of the dunker spot and having an impact there. Where are we at on the development of his shot? And you open this episode saying it's impossible to know how much these guys improve. It's impossible to know what the training is. But do you think that is so many times for these like young freak athletes would say, all right, they're just a jumper away. And I feel like it's underrated how rare it is that actually works out and the guy actually adds a jumper. But Detroit obviously has a great shooting coach, and you saw it in, I think it's Fred Vincent, right? And you saw it in what Ron Holland did in Summer League, where he looked massively improved in just 1 year. How optimistic are you that Ausar becomes a good enough player to be on the floor for 35 minutes? Because I asked you when you were most scared of the Knicks. I was most scared of the Pistons generally when Ausar Thompson was in the game.
Yeah, I think that there was some question about whether Ausar still was on a minutes restriction, because the Pistons, I mean, since January in the playoffs, they dominated in Ausar's minutes. When Ausar was subbed out, everyone was furious. No one understood it. So everyone just kind of assumed that maybe he was on a minutes restriction, but then maybe it is another, on the other side, it's JB just felt that more spacing would help. I think the numbers for 55 plus games bear out that that's not the case. And I think all the numbers in the playoffs showed that the Pistons' only chance of winning was with Ausar Thompson on the floor. And he's just that good of a defender to where whether he gets a 3-point shot or not, he should play 30 plus minutes just because that's how good he is. I thought the first few games he was not as impactful, didn't play enough. I don't feel like, but I thought the first few games he could have been better. Obviously, I don't think he was great, but I thought he started to play really well as the series went on. I wrote about the takeaways from the playoffs, and I went through Jalen Brunson's efficiency when Ausar was on the court versus when he was off, and it was just a crazy difference I believe he had like a 42 true shooting percentage with Ausar on the floor, and then it jumped to like 73 when he was off the floor. Like, he just dominated off the floor. So, and he did get Ausar at the end. Fantastic move. Good defenders are going to get got. It is what it is. But that was a great move from Jalen Brunson for sure, and great shot. Ausar, I think moving forward, I think the expectation for Ausar, and I think it's going to happen, he's going to be an all-defensive guy for the next 10 years. I think him and his brother will be that. They're that crazy defenders. Ausar is I think people who don't watch the Pistons enough, and some people who are too fixated in the Pistons community even, I get in this argument a lot, and I think so many people are fixated on his jumper where that's not really where he needs to improve on, because of I don't think anyone truly believes that he's going to become a shooter. Coming out of OTE, I was a little bit higher on his jump shot, but after 2 seasons in the NBA, I've really kind of backed off of that ever happening. I don't think he's ever going to become a 3-point shooter. If he does, that would be great. I just don't know if that's ever going to happen. And Trajan Langdon, I've talked with Ausar about this a few times over the last season. Trajan Langdon came out and said it himself multiple times this offseason. They want Ausar to improve his ball handling. Coming out of OTE, he played point guard at OTE. He's an incredible passer, incredible processor, reads defenses, sees things ahead of time. He's a great, great passer, great processor, but his handle just hasn't developed to a spot where the coaching staff is comfortable allowing him to utilize it. Now, in the few games that Cade missed this past year, we got to see point Ausar, and I've done some film breakdowns on the point Ausar games. It was a ton of fun to watch. I absolutely loved it. I thought you were going to see more of it moving into next year, and Trajan spoke about how he needs to improve that aspect of his game. That's what they want him to work on. I think that's where they really think of him, impacting this team offensively. I've brought this up on the podcast before. Like, everyone wants Ausar to improve his jump shot. At what percentage is he going to have to get to from the corners where you think he's better utilized in the corners instead of in the dunker spot as a screen and roller, as a DHO guy and the ball in his hands? Like, how good of a 3-point shooter do you have to get where he's impacting the game more doing that, just standing in the corner, than doing literally anything else he's good at offensively? So I just don't see it in his future. If it does, that would be great. But Ausar, I think, has the second highest ceiling on this team. I think he's the second most impactful player on this team. I think he's the second best player on this team. And if they're going to get to where they want to get to, he has to improve his ball handling. And if he can become that secondary playmaker where they trust him to run pick and rolls, trust him to run some weak side actions. If he's able to do that, then I think the ceiling is the limit. The ceiling is what's the word? Sky is the limit.
The ceiling is the roof. Michael Jordan.
Yeah. There you go. but yeah, I think his ceiling is crazy high, and I think he's going to be a big reason why the Pistons take a step next season if he can improve in these areas. And obviously, just being able to play without a minutes restriction now, coming off a full year now away from the blood clot situation, I think will be huge for him too.
He is dramatically more talented, but it does remind me a lot of the Deuce McBride situation in New York, where you look at a guy and people fixate on their limitations and what they can't do. And at a certain point, you just have to accept the numbers scream that you're better when this guy's on the court. And they were he was third or fourth in net rating in the regular season, the playoffs. He was third. He's plus 7.6 against the Knicks. And again, that's despite like the Knicks ignoring him and him not being a shooting threat, but he does so much else well that it just doesn't matter. And it's similar to Deuce McBride, where yes, he's small. And yes, like there are certain one-on-one matches where he's going to be taken advantage of. Yes, there are going to be stretches where he does not shoot the ball well. He didn't shoot the ball as well last year. Yes, he's a terrible finisher. And yet, like, he clearly does enough, because at the end of the day, all that matters is that you win games and you are winning the minutes where these guys are on the floor. And at some point, you just have to trust in that. And even more so than Deuce, for Ausar, like, given the fact that he doesn't have the size limitations, that there are no physical limitations there, and that he's just incredibly young still, like, you bet on that and you trust that and you lean into it. And even if there are nights where it kills you, that over a large enough sample size, you're going to be better for trusting that guy to be on the court for 30 minutes a game, because he's already whatever, top 5 to 7, maybe that's even low, athlete in the NBA. And like, whether like that turns into a star, that's the question. Like I was talking about it with the men the other day, where like Jimmy Butler is like the one obvious example in my mind, right, of a star wing who can't shoot threes. And to your point, if you want him to even be like in the universe of that trajectory, you have to trust him handling the ball, and you just have to give him those reps, and you have to hope you get some version of that, and that you have enough shooting at other spots, and that Cade is so good that you can kind of cover up for his weaknesses.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think it was a great point about McBride. I think it's in the same universe. It makes sense. The other thing to it was like, I think I don't know where the Knicks stand with this, but like with the Pistons were not a good half-court offense. So taking Ausar out and putting in another shooter is not improving your half-court offense. Your half-court offense is still going to be struggling. The Pistons, the reason why the Pistons, if you look at their playoff numbers, their offense was better with Ausar on the floor is not because their half-court offense went crazy. It's because they got more stops and were able to run in transition and were able to force turnovers. And that's where their best offense is. And Ausar is the main reason why that stuff is created. So when you take Ausar off, you're losing your best offense to try to improve what minimally in your worst offense. Like, it's not a good enough trade-off. And like you said, people focus on things that guys can't do so much instead of focusing on what they do and what they do bring that really elevates a team's ceiling. And again, if you have a large sample size of the teams just winning your minutes, you should probably just lean into that sample size. Like, it is what it is. Small sample sizes, I get it, but you got 500 plus possessions of something, man. Like, come on.
Yeah. It's such a good point, because if like Oklahoma City has the luxury of being like, something's not working great, we're going to pull the plug in 10 minutes. We have 4 other great options we can try. Pretty much no one else has that in like this current salary landscape. And so you have to accept some weaknesses. You have to accept some trade-offs, and like what is ultimately going to hurt you less in the aggregate, like, is the story of playing championship basketball or near championship basketball in the modern NBA. Ku Khahil, this was an incredible conversation. I'm really glad we got to belatedly have a postmortem on what was a really fun physical series. And I think it's good that we waited this long, because I know maybe not for you and me, we're professionals, but for the fans, and maybe even a little bit for me, there were some hard feelings coming out of that series. I think a few months later, like, I know what shines through is my respect for what Detroit's building. Sounds like it's very similar for you for the Knicks. I'm sure Knicks fans feel similarly. I'm sure Pistons fans, for the most part, feel similarly. So really cool to get to talk to you about all this. And I was wondering if you could just tell everyone one more time where they could find all your great work if they want to learn more about the Pistons.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Ku Khahil. You can go to my Substack, where I have articles and film breakdowns dropping as often as possible over at kukhahil.substack.com. And then obviously you can find the podcast, Locked On Pistons, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this one on, and wherever YouTube, go check it out on YouTube, Locked On Pistons. You find me, just like you can find Locked On Knicks over there. Thank you, Gavin, for having me. Maybe we get another Pistons Knicks series this upcoming season. We'll see what happens.
That'd be great, man. I'm excited. We'll go 90 minutes this time. We're really blowing out. Until then, he's Ku. I'm Gavin. We'll talk to you very soon on both Locked On Pistons and Locked On Knicks.
So that's all we got for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed this crossover two-parter with Gavin of Locked On Knicks. Go check him out if you haven't already. Go social love over there in the comment section. Subscribe over there. All that good stuff. I appreciate all of you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel if you have not already. Leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. If there's anything specifically you guys want us to talk about or cover that I have not already, before the season starts up, let us know in the ratings and the reviews on whatever podcast platform or in the comment section down below. But until next time, I will see you guys later. Stay safe out there, and peace out, everybody.